5-year-old legs pumped furiously as she clutched her mother's burial stone to her chest, the sacred blue crystal cutting into her small palms. Behind her, the hunting party's war cries echoed through the Crimson Valley like the howls of the shadow beasts themselves. There! The cursed spawn runs toward the Deadlands. Cole Mercer's voice boomed across the rocky terrain, his iron spear glinting in the twin sun's harsh light. The settlement's war chief had torn the leadership from her father's dying hands 3 moons ago, and now he wanted all traces of the old bloodline erased. His scarred face twisted with rage as he pointed his weapon toward the fleeing child, the same spear that had ended her father's life during the supposed beast attack that everyone knew was murder. Aria's blue skin blazed with heat as she scrambled down the steep ravine, her bare feet finding purchase on stones slick with morning dew. The funeral smoke still clung to her ragged clothes. They had given her mother's body to the flames at dawn, chanting the old words that were supposed to guide spirits to the ancestor realm. But by midday, they were hunting the child like a rabid animal. Her small lungs burned as she gasped for air, the thin mountain atmosphere making each breath a struggle. The white funeral dress, once pristine silk embroidered with silver threads, was now torn and stained with earth and her own blue blood. A crossbow bolt shattered against the rock beside her head, sending stone fragments flying. Sharp pieces cut her cheek, drawing drops of blue blood that sparkled oddly in the sunlight. The pain was sharp and immediate, but terror drove her forward. She could hear Selena Ward's cruel laughter mixing with the men's shouts. The red-haired woman had poisoned the council against Aria's family, spreading lies about curses and ancient sins that demanded blood payment. "Kill her now!" Selena shrieked from her position on the ridge above, her voice cutting through the mountain air like a blade. "Before she reaches the sacred grounds! If she pollutes the ancestor stones, we'll all be damned. The prophecies speak of blue blood bringing the starfall." The hunting party spread out like a pack of wolves, their movements coordinated by years of hunting together. They knew these mountains, knew every hiding place and escape route. Marcus Reeve, Cole's lieutenant, had circled around to the east with his hunting bow, the same weapon he'd used to bring down countless deer and elk. 2 more warriors flanked from the west, their bronze-tipped spears ready for the killing throw. Jarek the Bold carried his grandfather's warhammer, while young Torin bore a crossbow that had never missed its mark. Behind them all, Cole Mercer pressed forward with the determination of a man driven by fear and hatred. His iron spear had been forged in the deep fires of Mount Kalar, blessed by 7 shamans and bathed in the blood of 100 enemies. It was a weapon of legend, and now it thirsted for the blood of a 5-year-old child. The ground gave way beneath Aria's feet. She tumbled down a hidden slope, rolling through thorny undergrowth that tore at her funeral dress. The fabric, once white silk decorated with her mother's favorite blue flowers, was now shredded and stained with earth and blood. Thorns raked across her skin, leaving long scratches that wept blue tears. She crashed into the muddy bank of a rushing stream, the impact driving the air from her lungs and sending stars exploding across her vision. The burial stone flew from her hands, splashing into the dark water. The crystal, carved by her grandmother's grandmother, blessed by 7 generations of her mother's line, inscribed with the true name of their family line in the ancient script, began to sink into the swift current. "No," she sobbed, reaching desperately for the sinking crystal. It was the last piece of her mother she had left, the only proof that someone had once loved her. The stone contained memories, they said, fragments of her ancestors' wisdom that would guide her in dark times. But the current was too strong, and her small fingers could not reach far enough. The stone disappeared beneath the churning water, lost forever in the depths, taking with it the last connection to her heritage. That's when the hand closed around her wrist. She looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see a stranger, tall, weathered, with scars crisscrossing his face like a map of old battles. His dark hair was streaked with silver, pulled back in a warrior's knot that spoke of military discipline. His gray eyes held the hardness of someone who had seen too much death, but there was something else there too, a flicker of compassion that had survived whatever horrors had marked his face. A longbow was slung across his back, crafted from what looked like blackwood, the kind that only grew in the deepest, most dangerous parts of the Wildlands, where the trees fed on the bones of ancient battlefields. The wood was almost black, with a grain that seemed to shift and flow like living shadow. A hunting knife gleamed at his belt, its steel blade worn smooth by years of use, the handle wrapped in leather darkened by old blood. His leather armor bore the marks of claw and fang, testament to countless encounters with the beasts that roamed the untamed regions. Scratches from shadow beast claws, burn marks from fire drake breath, and puncture wounds from things that had no name crossed his chest and arms. On his left shoulder, a clan marking had been burned away, leaving only scar tissue, the sign of an exile or deserter. "Easy there, little blue," Draven Hale said, his voice rough but not unkind. He pulled her up from the water's edge with surprising gentleness for such calloused hands. "What's got the whole valley stirred up like a kicked anthill?" Aria tried to speak, but only a broken whisper emerged. Her throat was raw from crying, her voice lost to grief and terror. The man's eyes narrowed as he took in her condition. The torn funeral dress, the scratches covering her blue skin, the terror in her large silver eyes that seemed too old for such a young face. He had seen that look before, in refugee camps and slave markets, in the faces of children who had lost everything. The sound of approaching boots made his decision for him. Cole's hunting party was getting closer, their voices carrying over the sound of rushing water. The war chief's voice boomed above the rest, promising gold to whoever brought him the girl's head, threatening death to anyone who helped her escape. Without another word, Draven scooped Aria up and carried her deeper into the stream, using the rushing water to mask their scent. The current was strong enough to sweep away footprints and blood trails, buying them precious time. The water was icy cold, fed by mountain snows that never fully melted, even in the height of summer. Aria's lips turned blue, but she clung to him without complaint, instinctively understanding that silence meant survival. Behind them, Cole's hunting party reached the bank, cursing as they lost the trail. Marcus Reeve knelt by the water's edge, studying the muddy ground with a tracker's eye. He was the best hunter in 3 valleys, capable of following a week-old trail through solid rock. But the rushing water had done its work, washing away all traces of their passage. "Footprints here," he called out, pointing to the disturbed mud. "Large boots, adult male, someone's taken the girl." "Who would dare?" snarled Jarek the Bold, hefting his warhammer. The weapon was ancient iron, inscribed with runes of power that glowed faintly in the mountain light. "The whole valley knows the price on her head." "Split up," Mercer roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "She can't have gone far. Find her before nightfall, or the shadow beast will do our work for us. And when you find whoever's helping her, bring me his head." Selena Ward's laughter was like breaking glass, sharp and cold in the thin air. 10 gold pieces to the man who brings me the girl's body," she called out, her voice carrying across the water. 20 if she's still breathing when you deliver her. I want to see the light fade from those cursed eyes myself." Young Torrance spat into the stream, his crossbow gleaming in the sunlight. "Should have drowned her at birth," he muttered. "Blue blood brings nothing but trouble. My grandfather told stories of the Starfall Wars, when their kind brought fire from the sky." Draven waded upstream for nearly an hour, his legs working against the current like iron pistons. The water grew deeper and more treacherous as they moved into the high country, where avalanches had carved new channels through the rock. Aria clung to his neck, too exhausted and traumatized to do anything but hold on. Her small body shivered uncontrollably, but she made no sound of complaint. The stream led them through a narrow gorge where the walls rose sheer on either side, carved smooth by millennia of rushing water. Ancient symbols were carved into the stone here, spirals and geometric patterns that spoke of a civilization long vanished from these lands. The markings seemed to glow faintly in the shadow of the gorge, as if they still held some fragment of the power that had created them. By the time they finally climbed out on the far side of the valley, both of them were near collapse from cold and exhaustion. Draven's lips were blue, and his hands shook as he lifted Aria onto the bank. But they had gained precious distance from their pursuers, and the multiple streams that fed into the main channel would make tracking nearly impossible. He set Aria down in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall, the constant rush of water drowning out any sound they might make. The cave was dry, despite its proximity to the water, carved deep into the living rock by centuries of wind and weather. Ancient markings covered the walls, the same spirals and geometric patterns they had seen in the gorge, but here they were more elaborate, forming complex mandalas that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. The air inside the cave was warm, heated by some source deep within the earth. Mineral deposits formed strange sculptures on the walls, their crystalline surfaces reflecting the light in rainbow patterns. In the deepest part of the cave, a natural spring bubbled up from the rock, its water clear and sweet despite the sulfurous smell that marked it as coming from the volcanic regions beneath the mountains. "Who are you running from?" he asked, offering her strips of dried meat from his pack. The food was tough and salty, preserved with mountain herbs that had a sharp, clean taste. He also produced a small clay pot filled with honey, a luxury that spoke of wealth or careful trading. "The new chief," Aria whispered, her voice barely audible over the water. "He says I'm cursed. He says the shadow beasts come because of me." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of a child's incomprehension at the cruelty of adults. She didn't understand the politics that had led to her exile, couldn't grasp the complex fears and prejudices that had turned her neighbors into enemies. All she knew was that the people who had once smiled at her now wanted her dead. Draven's jaw tightened. He had heard of Cole Mercer, a brutal man who had seized control of the Blue Valley settlement through fear and violence. The entrepreneur had been tracking a caravan of escaped slaves when he stumbled into this hunt. But now something deeper stirred in his chest. Something he thought had died 5 years ago with his own family. "Your mother, she was blue-skinned like you?" Aria nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. The wasting sickness took her. Her skin turned gray, and she couldn't eat. She got thinner and thinner until she was just bones and breath. "Father died in the beast raids last winter. Cole says I don't belong with the settlement people anymore." The girl's words hit Draven like a physical blow. His own daughter would have been about this age if the fever hadn't taken her 5 years ago, if his wife hadn't followed her into death's embrace, leaving him empty and wandering the savage lands as a trader of goods and secrets. The memory was a constant ache in his chest, a wound that never quite healed. "Listen to me," he said, crouching down to meet her eyes. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe. But it won't be easy. There are dangers out here worse than angry men with spears." As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed from the forest beyond the cave. Long, mournful, and definitely not human. The sound raised the hair on the back of Draven's neck and sent ice through his veins. It was answered by another howl, then another, until the night was filled with the voices of things that hunted in the darkness. Aria pressed closer to him, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "Shadow beasts?" she whispered. Draven checked his weapons. Bow, quiver of 30 arrows, hunting knife, and a short sword taken from a bandit chief in the southern wastes. The blade had tasted blood many times. Its steel folded and refolded until it could cut through mail like cloth. The bow was his pride, crafted by the mountain clans who knew the secrets of working Blackwood. But against a pack of shadow beasts, it felt inadequate. "We move at first light," he decided. "There's a free settlement 3 days north, past the burning stones. They don't ask questions about bloodlines or curses." But the shadow beasts had other plans. The attack came just before dawn, when the mist hung thick around the waterfall and visibility was almost zero. Draven heard the scrape of claws on stone and had his bow drawn before his mind fully processed the danger. Years of survival in the Wildlands had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. The first beast lunged through the spray, its blue-black fur gleaming wet, yellow eyes fixed on Aria like burning coals. The creature was massive, nearly the size of a horse, with muscles that rippled beneath its midnight fur. Its jaws could crush a man's skull like an eggshell, and its claws were designed to rend flesh from bone. But it was the intelligence in those yellow eyes that truly frightened him. These weren't mindless predators, but cunning hunters with the wit to use strategy. His arrow took it through the throat, the broadhead punching through hide and cartilage to sever the major blood vessels. The beast dropped in a spray of dark blood that steamed in the cold air, its death cry echoing through the cave. But 2 more followed, then 3, their lean bodies moving like liquid death in the dim light. "Stay behind me," Draven shouted, knocking another arrow. The second beast leaped high, trying to go over his head and reach the child. He rolled sideways, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle his hair, and put an arrow through its ribs as it landed. The shaft punched through the creature's side, finding the gap between ribs to pierce lung and heart. The beast let out a shriek that was almost human, thrashing in its death throes before finally going still. Dark blood pooled on the cave floor, mixing with the spray from the waterfall to create patterns that looked almost like writing. The third beast was smarter. It circled to the side, yellow eyes calculating, trying to get around him to reach Aria. The creature's patience was unnerving. Most predators would have charged by now, but this one was waiting for the perfect moment. Draven dropped his bow and drew his sword just as the creature pounced. Steel met fang and claw in a flurry of violence that lasted only seconds but felt like hours. The beast's weight drove him to his knees, and he felt claws rake across his back, tearing through leather armor like paper. But his blade found its mark, sliding between the ribs to pierce the creature's heart. The beast convulsed once, then went limp, its weight pinning him to the cave floor. More howls echoed from the forest. The pack was getting closer, drawn by the scent of blood and the death cries of their packmates. Draven struggled to free himself from the dead beast's weight, feeling warm blood trickling down his back, where the claws had found their mark. "Can you climb?" Draven asked, wiping blood from a gash on his arm, where the beast's claws had found their mark. Aria nodded, though her face was pale with terror. Her silver eyes were wide with shock, but there was determination there too. The stubborn courage of a child who had already faced too much loss. He boosted her up the cave wall to a narrow ledge that ran along the upper reaches of the chamber, then followed just as 4 more shadow beasts poured through the waterfall. The new arrivals were even larger than the first group, their fur marked with scars that spoke of many battles. They moved with pack coordination, spreading out to surround their position. The largest one, clearly the alpha, had scars covering its muzzle and a white patch over one eye that spoke of many battles. Its remaining yellow eye held an intelligence that was almost human. They climbed higher, finding handholds in the slick rock face. The stone was treacherous, worn smooth by countless years of water and wind, but desperation gave them strength. Behind them, the beast leaped and snarled, their claws scraping stone but unable to follow. The alpha was persistent, launching itself halfway up the wall in a display of raw power that sent stone chips raining down on the others. An arrow from Draven's bow caught the alpha in the shoulder, the broadhead punching deep into muscle and bone. The beast let out a roar of pain and fury, its claws scrabbling against the smooth stone as it fell. It hit the pool below with a splash that echoed through the cave, dark blood spreading through the water like ink. The climb took them to the top of the waterfall, where they could see the vast expanse of the Wildlands stretching north. The landscape was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Rolling hills covered in blue-leafed forest, distant mountains capped with eternal snow, and vast prairies where strange creatures grazed beneath the twin suns. The suns were rising now, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. In the distance, smoke columns rose from a dozen different sources: settlements, campfires, and the burning remnants of places that had not survived the night. This was a harsh land where only the strong survived, where every day was a struggle against forces that sought to tear down everything humans had built. Smoke rose from the Blue Valley settlement to the south. Cole's people had lit signal fires, probably calling for help from neighboring villages. The smoke was black and thick, suggesting they were burning something more than wood. Perhaps they were destroying evidence of what they had done, or maybe they were preparing for war. "They'll have the whole region looking for you by tomorrow," Draven observed, shouldering his pack. The leather straps dug into his shoulders, heavy with supplies that would have to last them for days in the wilderness. "We need to move fast and stay off the main trails." The journey became a test of endurance that would have broken most adults, let alone a 5-year-old child. They traveled by night and hid during the day, avoiding the patrols that combed the hills with increasing desperation. The mountain paths were treacherous, carved from living rock by ancient peoples whose names had been forgotten. In some places, the trail was so narrow that they had to inch along with their backs pressed against sheer cliff faces, the valley floor hundreds of feet below. Aria never complained, though Draven could see the exhaustion etched in her young face. Her blue skin had a grayish tinge that spoke of fatigue and stress, and her silver eyes had lost some of their natural brightness. But she followed without question, trusting him with the absolute faith that only children possessed. When she stumbled, she picked herself up. When she fell, she got back to her feet and kept walking. During the day, they sheltered in caves, hollow trees, or dense thickets that provided concealment from searching eyes. Draven taught her the basics of wilderness survival, how to move silently through underbrush, how to read the signs of weather in the clouds, how to find water by following the flight patterns of birds. She proved to be a quick learner, her young mind absorbing the lessons with the desperate hunger of someone who knew her life depended on it. Never break the skyline, he taught her as they crouched behind a ridge, watching a patrol pass below. And always have an escape route planned before you commit to a position. On the second day, they encountered the remains of a merchant caravan that had been attacked by bandits. The wagons were overturned and burned, their contents scattered across the trail like the debris of shattered dreams. Bodies lay where they had fallen, picked clean by scavengers, but still identifiable by their clothing and equipment. Draven studied the scene with a professional eye, reading the story written in blood and broken weapons. The merchants had tried to circle their wagons, but the bandits had overwhelmed them with superior numbers. It had been a massacre, not a battle. Men armed with farming tools against professional killers with military weapons. Why did they do this? Aria asked, her voice small in the vastness of the mountains. Because they could, Draven replied grimly. Because there's no law here except what a man can enforce with his own sword. Among the debris, he found useful supplies, arrows that had survived the flames, a water skin that hadn't been punctured, and a small pouch of coins that the bandits had somehow overlooked. Most importantly, he found a map that showed the location of water sources and safe campsites along the northern route. They also found evidence that the bandits were still in the area. Fresh horse tracks led away from the massacre site, heading north along the same route they needed to take. The tracks were recent, no more than a day old, which meant the raiders were probably camped somewhere ahead, waiting for the next caravan to stumble into their trap. We'll have to go around, Draven decided, studying the map by moonlight. Add another day to our journey, but better than walking into an ambush. The detour took them through the Whispering Gorge, a narrow canyon where the wind created strange sounds that echoed off the walls like voices from the dead. Ancient legends spoke of spirits that haunted these places, the ghosts of those who had died violent deaths seeking revenge on the living. Draven didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in ambushes, and the gorge would be a perfect place for one. They moved through the canyon in single file, weapons ready, every sense alert for danger. The walls rose sheer on either side, carved smooth by millennia of flash floods. In places, the passage was so narrow that they had to turn sideways to squeeze through. If they were caught here by enemies, there would be no escape. Halfway through the gorge, they found evidence of the ancient civilization that had once claimed these lands. Carved into the rock face were elaborate murals depicting scenes of daily life. People with blue skin like Aria's, working in fields beneath alien stars, building cities that defied gravity, conducting rituals around glowing crystals that seemed to pulse with inner light. They look like you, Draven observed, studying the carvings by torchlight. Aria pressed closer to the wall, her small hands tracing the carved figures. Mama used to tell stories, she whispered, about the star people who came before. She said we were their children, scattered across the worlds when the great darkness came. The murals told a story of prosperity and catastrophe. The early scenes showed a thriving civilization, but the later ones depicted war and destruction. Armies of creatures that looked like shadow beasts overran the cities, while the sky rained fire and the very ground cracked and bled. The final mural showed a great exodus, ships ascending into the stars while the world burned below. What happened to them? Aria asked. I don't know, Draven admitted, but they survived long enough to have children, or you wouldn't be here. They emerged from the gorge as the first sun crested the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Before them stretched a vast plain dotted with the ruins of the ancient civilization. Broken towers reached toward the sky like accusing fingers, their surfaces covered with the same spiraling script they had seen in the caves. The ruins were beautiful in their desolation, but they also radiated a sense of wrongness that made the hair on Draven's neck stand on end. Something terrible had happened here. Something that had left its mark on the very stones. Animals avoided the area, and even the hardy mountain plants grew stunted and twisted near the ruins. We won't camp here tonight, Draven decided. Whatever destroyed this place, I don't want to risk waking it up. They skirted the edge of the ruins, giving the broken towers a wide berth. As they traveled, Draven noticed that Aria kept looking back at the ancient city, her silver eyes reflecting a sadness that seemed too deep for her young years. It was as if she was mourning for people she had never known, grieving for a civilization that had died before her birth. On the second night, they encountered a living merchant caravan under attack by the same band of raiders whose tracks they had been following. The scene was chaos: overturned wagons, scattered goods, and the screams of people fighting for their lives. A group of armed bandits had surrounded the merchants, their crude weapons glinting in the firelight. The raiders were a mixed bunch: deserters from various armies, failed farmers driven to banditry by bad harvests, and men who had simply chosen the outlaw life because it was easier than honest work. Their leader was a scarred brute named Gareth the Red, whose reputation for cruelty was known throughout the region. Draven's conscience warred with his caution for exactly 3 heartbeats before he unslung his bow. He had seen too many innocents die to walk away from this slaughter, and something about the merchant caravan reminded him of his own family's final journey. "Stay hidden," he told Aria, positioning her behind a boulder that would provide cover from arrows. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I call for you." The raiders had the merchants surrounded, their crude weapons glinting in the firelight. Draven counted 7 attackers. Long odds, but not impossible for someone with his experience. The merchants were putting up a brave fight, but they were traitors, not warriors. They had courage but lacked the skill to make it count against professional killers. His first arrow dropped the leader from his horse, the broadhead taking Gareth the Red clean through the chest. The bandit chief toppled backward with a surprised grunt, his sword clattering to the ground. Dark blood spread across his leather armor, and his eyes went wide with shock before the light faded from them forever. The second arrow took down the archer on the left flank, catching him as he drew back his bowstring. The shaft punched through his throat, and he fell backward into the campfire with a shower of sparks. His death scream was cut short as the flames consumed his clothing. The remaining raiders charged his position, screaming war cries that echoed through the night. They were desperate men, the kind who had turned to banditry because they lacked the skill for honest work. But desperation could make even weak men dangerous, and they came at him with the fury of cornered beasts. Draven met them with steel, his sword dancing in deadly arcs. Years of fighting in the slave pits of the southern kingdoms had taught him to turn desperation into precision. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose, because in many ways, he was. Each cut was calculated for maximum effect, each thrust aimed at vital organs. The first raider came at him with a rusty axe, swinging wild overhead chops that left him open for counterattack. The man was strong but clumsy, relying on brute force rather than skill. Draven's blade slid under the man's guard, finding the gap between his crude armor plates. The raider's eyes went wide with surprise as steel pierced his heart. The second attacker was more skilled, wielding a proper sword with some knowledge of its use. He had military training, evident in his stance and the way he held his weapon. They exchanged a flurry of cuts and thrusts, steel ringing against steel in the ancient dance of battle. But Draven's superior training and experience told in the end. His blade found the man's throat in a spray of crimson. The remaining bandits tried to overwhelm him with numbers, but the narrow space between the wagons limited how many could attack at once. Draven used the terrain to his advantage, keeping his back to a wagon wheel and forcing them to come at him one at a time. His sword arm moved with mechanical precision, each strike calculated for maximum effect. Block, parry, riposte. The deadly dance of steel on steel continued until the last raider fell. 2 tried to flee when they saw their comrades dying, but Draven's arrows found them before they could escape into the darkness. He couldn't afford to let them live and bring reinforcements. When the battle was over, Draven stood bleeding from a dozen wounds, his chest heaving with exhaustion. A sword cut along his ribs sent blood trickling down his side, and a bandit's spear had opened a gash on his left arm. But he was alive, and more importantly, So were most of the merchants. The survivors from the merchant caravan approached cautiously, weapons still drawn. They had every reason to be suspicious. In these lawless lands, today's rescuer could be tomorrow's threat. But their leader, an older woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, seemed to recognize something in Draven's face. "Who are you, stranger?" she asked, her voice steady despite the carnage around them. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she had been trading these routes for 20 years. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had survived many dangers, and her weathered face spoke of years spent traveling the treacherous trade routes that connected the scattered settlements of the Wildlands. "Someone who doesn't like seeing good people die," Draven replied, wiping his sword clean on a dead raider's cloak. Elena studied him for a long moment, taking in his scarred face, his practiced movements, the way he held his weapons. She had seen many fighters in her time, and she could tell the difference between a killer and a protector. Whatever darkness lay in this man's past, he had chosen to use his skills to save innocence tonight. "You fight like a man protecting something precious," she observed. "Where is she?" Draven's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Elena raised her hands peacefully. "I have grandchildren," she said simply. "I know the look of a man traveling with a child, and I know the sound of small feet trying to be quiet." Aria emerged from her hiding place, her silver eyes wide with wonder at Elena's gentle smile. The child had watched the entire battle from her concealment, seeing how Draven had risked his life to save strangers. It was a lesson about the kind of man he was, the kind who couldn't walk away from innocent people in danger. "Blue skin," Elena observed without judgment. "Running from the valley settlements, I guess. They've grown less tolerant of differences in recent years." She had seen the gradual change in the mountain settlements, the way fear and prejudice had slowly poisoned communities that had once been welcoming to all peoples. The old generation, who remembered the Starfall Wars and the ancient alliances, were dying off. The young ones knew only fear and superstition. "You know of a safe place?" Draven asked. "The northern reaches," Elena replied, "past the burning stones. There's a settlement there that welcomes all kinds, human, blue skin, even the occasional reformed bandit." She looked meaningfully at the scars covering Draven's arms. "They ask no questions about the past, only judge you by your actions in the present." Elena gave them supplies from her salvaged goods, food, clean water, and a small dagger with a handle sized for child's hands. The blade was good steel, well-balanced, and sharp enough to shave with. More importantly, it was a symbol of trust, a weapon that could be used for protection or survival. "Learn to use it," she advised Aria. "The world is harsh, but you're stronger than you know." She also provided them with warmer clothing, a thick cloak for Aria that would help disguise her distinctive blue skin, and a new leather jerkin for Draven to replace his damaged armor. The cloak was lined with fur from some mountain animal, soft and warm against the child's skin. Most importantly, Elena gave them information: the safest routes through the burning stones, the location of water sources, and warnings about the dangers they would face. She drew maps in the dirt by firelight, marking safe campsites and danger zones with the precision of someone who had traveled these paths many times. "There are worse things than raiders in the deep wildlands," Elena warned. "The bone collectors hunt in the ruins near the northern pass. And there are stories of something called the Devourer that stalks the edges of the stone fields." She told them about the bone collectors, twisted creatures that had once been human, transformed by exposure to the ancient radiation that still lingered in some of the ruins. They hunted in packs, using primitive weapons and traps to capture living prey. What they did with their victims was better left unspoken. The Devourer was something else entirely, a creature of legend that some claimed was a remnant of the Starfall Wars. It was said to be as large as a dragon but without wings, with hide thick enough to turn aside steel blades and an appetite for living flesh. Few who encountered it lived to tell the tale. "Stick to the marked paths," Elena advised, "and if you see bones arranged in patterns, turn back immediately." That's a bone collector trap. They parted ways at dawn, the merchant caravan heading east toward the coastal cities, while Draven and Aria continued north. Elena's final gift was a hunting horn carved from bone, its surface inscribed with protective symbols. Blow this if you're in mortal danger, she said. There are still some in these lands who honor the old ways. They reached the burning stones on the third day, a field of red-hot volcanic rock that stretched for miles across their path. The landscape was like something from a fever dream, with pillars of stone that glowed with inner fire and pools of molten rock that bubbled and steamed. The heat was overwhelming, rising from the ground in shimmering waves that distorted the air like water. The stones themselves were a testament to the violence that had shaped this land. Some were still molten from the volcanic activity deep beneath the earth, while others had cooled into fantastic shapes that resembled twisted sculptures. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and brimstone, making each breath an effort that burned the lungs. We cross at night, Draven decided, studying the treacherous terrain. The stones will still be hot, but not enough to cook us alive. They waited in the shade of a rocky outcrop, trying to conserve their strength for the ordeal ahead. Draven used the time to repair their equipment, sharpening blades and checking the strings on his bow. Aria watched him work, absorbing the lessons in weapon maintenance that might save her life someday. As the sun set, the stones began to cool, though they still radiated enough heat to be felt from a distance. The temperature drop was gradual, the volcanic rock releasing the day's accumulated heat in waves that made the air dance and shimmer. Draven wrapped Aria's feet in multiple layers of cloth, then did the same for his own. It wouldn't last long against the intense heat, but it might give them enough protection to reach the other side. The crossing began just after full dark, when the stones were at their coolest. Even so, the heat was intense enough to make breathing difficult. Each step was carefully planned, testing each stone before committing their full weight. Some rocks that looked solid crumbled under pressure, while others that appeared unstable proved surprisingly firm. But night brought different dangers. As they picked their way carefully across the treacherous ground, their foot wrappings smoking with each step, the sound of pursuit reached them. Cole Mercer had found their trail. "There!" Selena Ward's voice carried across the stone field, sharp with triumph. "I can see them." The hunting party had grown since their escape from the valley. Word had spread to neighboring settlements, and now nearly 20 armed men followed Cole's banner. They were all on foot. Horses couldn't cross the burning stones, but they were fresh, while Draven and Aria were exhausted from days of travel. The pursuers carried torches that bobbed in the distance like angry fireflies. In the lead was Cole Mercer himself, his iron spear gleaming in the torchlight, his scarred face twisted with determination. Behind him came Marcus Reeve and the other veterans, along with new faces from allied settlements who had joined the hunt for gold or glory. Draven cursed under his breath. The hunting party was gaining ground, their numbers allowing them to spread out and cover more territory. They had also learned from their earlier failures, bringing rope and grappling hooks to navigate difficult terrain. Worse, they had bloodhounds now, beasts that could track a scent across bare rock. "They're gaining on us," Aria whispered, looking back at the approaching lights. The child was struggling now, her small legs barely able to carry her across the rough terrain. The heat was sapping her strength, and Draven could see that she was close to collapse. Her blue skin had taken on an unhealthy gray pallor, and her breathing was labored despite the thin air. He made a decision that went against every survival instinct he possessed. He stopped in the middle of the stone field and began laying out his remaining arrows in careful lines, sorting them by type: broadheads for armor, bodkins for mail, hunting points for unprotected flesh. "What are you doing?" Aria asked, her voice weak with exhaustion. "Making a stand," he replied grimly. "They can only come at us one way across these stones. That evens the odds. It was a desperate plan, but it was their only chance. The hot stones would limit the attackers' movement, forcing them to approach along predictable paths. The treacherous footing would work against the larger force, negating their numerical advantage. If Draven could use his bow effectively, he might be able to thin their numbers before they got close enough for melee combat. He chose his position carefully, a natural depression in the rock that would provide some cover from arrows, with good sight lines in all directions. The stone here was cooler than the surrounding area, offering a small respite from the heat. Most importantly, it forced his enemies to approach across open ground where his bow would have maximum effect. Cole Mercer led the charge, his iron spear gleaming in the moonlight. The war chief had wrapped his feet in thick leather, but Draven could see him limping from the heat. Behind him came the other warriors, all of them seasoned fighters with blood in their eyes. They spread out across the stone field as much as the terrain would allow, trying to minimize their exposure to Draven's archery. "Give us the girl!" Mercer shouted, his voice echoing across the wasteland. "She doesn't belong to you, stranger." "She belongs to herself," Draven replied, drawing his bow. The string sang as he pulled it back, arrow knocked and ready. "And I've seen enough children die." His first arrow took down the warrior on the far left, catching him in the chest and sending him tumbling backward onto the burning stones. The man's scream was cut short as the superheated rock began to cook him alive, his armor growing red-hot against his flesh. The smell of burning meat filled the air. The second arrow caught another attacker in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. He tried to rise, but the pain and shock of the wound kept him down. Blood streamed from the wound, hissing when it hit the hot stone. Marcus Reeves shouted orders, trying to coordinate the attack. The lieutenant was experienced enough to recognize good archery when he saw it, and he knew they needed to close the distance quickly or lose half their men to Draven's bow. But the stone field worked against them. The uneven footing made charging impossible, and the heat sapped their strength with every step. 2 more men fell to Draven's arrows before they got within spear range, and a third collapsed from heat exhaustion. Then they were too close for archery, and Draven drew his sword. The battle was brutal and desperate, made even more dangerous by the treacherous terrain. Every step was a calculated risk. Move too far in any direction, and the hot stones would burn through their makeshift foot protection in seconds. Draven fought with the fury of a man protecting his own blood, but he was outnumbered 15-1, and the environment was working against him as much as his enemies. A spear thrust opened a gash along his ribs, the iron point sliding between his armor plates to bite deep into flesh. A sword cut opened his left arm from elbows to wrist, sending blood streaming down to drip onto the hot stones where it sizzled and steamed. But he held his ground, his blade weaving a web of death around Aria's small form. The years of fighting in gladiatorial pits had taught him to conserve his energy, to make every movement count. Each cut was precisely aimed, each thrust calculated for maximum effect. One by one the warriors fell, their blood feeding the hungry stones beneath their feet. Jarek the Bold came at him with his ancestral warhammer, the ancient weapon glowing with heat from the stones. The big man was slow but incredibly strong, each blow capable of crushing bone, even through armor. Draven danced around the heavy swings, using speed and agility to avoid the crushing impacts. The hammer came down where his head had been a split second before, sending up a shower of sparks as it struck stone. Draven's counter-thrust took Jarek in the armpit, where the armor provided less protection. The blade slid between ribs to find the heart, and the big man toppled forward onto the burning rocks. Young Torin tried to put a crossbow bolt in Draven's back, but Aria threw a stone that spoiled his aim. The bolt went wide, and Draven's thrown knife took the young hunter in the throat. He fell backward with a gurgle, his life's blood pooling on the superheated stone. Marcus Reeve came at him with a pair of curved daggers, trying to get inside his sword's reach. The lieutenant was fast and skilled, his blades flickering like serpent tongues in the torchlight. He had learned his trade in the border wars, where close combat was an art form practiced by masters of death. Draven gave ground, drawing the man away from Aria, then suddenly reversed direction and drove his sword through Reeve's heart. The lieutenant's eyes went wide with surprise, and he whispered something that might have been a prayer before the light faded from his eyes. The battle raged on, a desperate struggle between a lone warrior and a pack of killers. Men died on both sides, their screams echoing across the wasteland. The stone field became a charnel house, littered with bodies and slick with blood that boiled and steamed on the superheated rock. Finally, only Cole Mercer remained. The war chief was bigger and stronger than Draven, his reach longer. His iron spear had drunk the blood of 100 enemies, and his skills had been honed in a dozen wars. But he was also angry, and anger made him sloppy. When he thrust with his spear, Draven sidestepped and grabbed the shaft, pulling Mercer off balance. The war chief stumbled, his foot landing on a particularly hot stone that burned through his leather wrapping. His scream of pain and rage echoed across the wasteland as Draven's sword found the gap in his armor, sliding between the ribs to pierce his heart. Mercer fell to his knees, blood frothing on his lips. The curse, he gasped, his eyes wide with dying fervor. She'll bring destruction to whatever settlement takes her in. The star spawn always do. Mark my words, stranger. The shadow follows her. The only curse here was your fear, Draven replied, watching the light fade from the man's eyes. But Selena Ward had held back from the fighting, watching from a safe distance. Now she approached with a crossbow, trained on Aria, her red hair wild in the heat-distorted air. The woman's face was twisted with hatred, her green eyes burning with fanatic fervor. It ends here, she said, her voice cold as winterstone. The blue-skinned bloodline dies tonight. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she never saw the small dagger that flew from Aria's hand, the weapon Elena Vasquez had given her. It was a desperate throw from a 5-year-old, guided more by instinct than skill. But sometimes desperation could guide a blade truer than training. The dagger caught Selena in the throat, severing the major blood vessels. She fell backward onto the burning stones with a scream that was cut short as the superheated rock began its grisly work. Her crossbow discharged harmlessly into the air, the bolt disappearing into the darkness. Draven stared at Aria in shock. The child looked down at her hands as if surprised by what they had done. She was going to kill you, Aria said simply, her voice steady despite the trauma of what had just happened. They finished crossing the stone field in silence, both of them changed by what had happened there. The battle had cost them dearly. Draven was wounded and exhausted, his clothes torn and bloody. Aria had been forced to take a life to protect the man who was protecting her, a burden that no child should have to bear. On the far side of the burning stones, they found cool grass and clean water. The contrast was startling after the hellish heat of the volcanic field. Spring water bubbled up from the rocks, clear and sweet, while soft grass provided a carpet for their aching feet. But their trials were far from over. The Northern Reaches settlement was indeed welcoming, as Elena had promised. It was a community built in the ruins of an ancient city, its people living among stone buildings that spoke of a lost civilization. The architecture was beautiful but alien, flowing curves and impossible arches that seemed to defy gravity, walls that changed color with the light, and doorways that were perfectly round rather than rectangular. The current inhabitants were a mixed group, humans, blueskins, and other peoples Draven didn't recognize. There were the tall, pale northerners with their braided hair and tribal tattoos, the dark-skinned desert folk with their flowing robes and curved blades, even a few of the cat people from the eastern kingdoms, their feline features marking them as descendants of the gene shapers from before the starfall. All of them seemed to share the bond of those who had found refuge after hardship. They had the look of survivors, people who had lost everything and rebuilt their lives from nothing. But there was also hope here, a sense of community that Draven hadn't seen in years. Mara Quinn, the settlement's leader, was a woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had once been a warrior herself, if the scars on her hands and arms were any indication. Her left hand was missing 2 fingers, probably taken by a sword blade, and a long scar ran from her right ear to the corner of her mouth. She listened to their story without judgment, her weathered face impassive as Draven recounted their journey across the Wildlands. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, studying them both with those sharp eyes. "The child can stay as long as she wishes," Mara said finally, "and you're welcome too, if you can find purpose here." She assigned them a small dwelling on the outskirts of the community, a house built into the side of a hill, its walls carved from living rock. The interior was larger than it appeared from outside, with multiple rooms connected by passages that seemed to follow no logical pattern. Ancient symbols covered the walls, glowing faintly in the darkness like captured starlight. For the first time in years, Draven felt something like hope stirring in his chest. But he should have remembered that hope was a dangerous thing in the Wildlands. The trouble began 3 months after their arrival. A trading caravan arrived from the eastern provinces, bringing news and goods to the settlement. Among the traders was a man named Victor Harrow, tall, elegant, with the pale skin and refined features of the coastal aristocracy. He claimed to be a legitimate merchant, but Draven's instincts told him otherwise. Harrow wore expensive clothes that spoke of wealth and power, silk robes embroidered with gold thread, leather boots that had never touched mud, and rings on every finger that glittered with precious stones. His hair was perfectly groomed, and his hands were soft and white, unmarked by honest labor. The merchant took an immediate interest in Aria, asking questions about her background, her abilities, her lineage. He spoke of rare bloodlines and ancient powers, of collectors in distant cities who paid fortunes for exotic specimens. His words were always carefully chosen, never quite crossing the line into open threat, but the implication was clear. Such a unique child, Harrow observed one day, watching Aria play with the other settlement children. The blue-skin traits are becoming quite rare. There are those who would pay handsomely for the opportunity to study such exceptional genetics. Draven's hand moved to his sword hilt. The girl isn't for sale. Harrow smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too sharp. Of course not. I was merely making conversation. Though I should mention, there are rumors that certain parties from the southern kingdoms are offering substantial rewards for information about blue-skin refugees, particularly children. The threat was unmistakable now. Harrow was either a slave trader himself or working for those who were. The southern kingdoms had a thriving market in exotic slaves, where blue-skinned children were considered especially valuable for their supposed mystical properties. That night, Draven found Mara Quinn and told her about the conversation. The settlement leader's face darkened as she listened, her scarred hands clenching into fists. "I know Harrow's reputation," she said grimly. "He's a procurer for the flesh markets in Velak City. If he's here, it means someone has put a bounty on the girl." "How much?" Draven asked. "Enough to buy a small army," Mara replied. "And there are people in this settlement who might be tempted by that kind of money." Her words proved prophetic. Within days, strange things began happening around the settlement. Aria's dwelling was watched by men who melted away when approached. Tools and supplies began disappearing from the communal stores. Fights broke out between families who had lived peacefully together for years. The breaking point came when someone tried to poison the settlement's water supply. Only quick action by the settlement's healer prevented a disaster, but the message was clear. Harrow's gold was dividing the community against itself. "We have to leave," Draven told Mara. "My presence here is putting everyone in danger." "Running won't solve this," Mara replied. "Harrow has resources we can't match. He'll follow you wherever you go, and next time there might not be anyone to help." She was right, and Draven knew it. But staying meant watching the settlement tear itself apart as greed and fear poisoned the community. There had to be another way. The solution came from an unexpected source. Gideon Thorne, the settlement's blacksmith, approached Draven with a proposal. Thorne was a massive man with arms like tree trunks and hands that could bend steel. But his most valuable asset was his knowledge of the ancient ruins that surrounded the settlement. "There's a place," Thorne said, his voice low and gravelly, "deep in the old city. The Vault of Echoes, they call it. Legend says it was built by the first people who lived here, before the Sci-Fi came and drove them away." Thorne led him to an ancient map carved into the wall of his forge, its surface blackened by years of smoke and soot. The map showed the settlement as it had been in its prime, a vast metropolis that covered the entire valley, with towers that reached toward the stars and gardens that bloomed with impossible colors. "What kind of place?" Draven asked, studying the intricate carvings. "A testing ground. They say it was designed to separate the worthy from the unworthy, to prove that someone had the right to claim what lay inside. No one's ever made it through alive, but then again, no one's ever had a reason as good as yours." The plan was desperate and dangerous, but it was their only chance. If Draven could reach the heart of the vault and claim whatever treasure lay there, he might have something valuable enough to buy Harrow off, or at least valuable enough to hire protection from other sources. The Vault of Echoes lay deep beneath the settlement, accessible through a hidden entrance in the old temple district. The temple itself was a marvel of ancient engineering, a structure that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, its faceted walls reflecting light in patterns that hurt the eyes to follow. Draven left Aria in Mara's care and descended into the depths alone. The entrance was guarded by mechanisms that still functioned. After centuries of abandonment, pressure plates that triggered spear traps, weighted stones that fell from hidden alcoves, and jets of poisonous gas that erupted from holes in the walls. The first chamber was a maze of mirrors that reflected not just images, but sounds and scents as well. Draven could hear the echoes of ancient voices speaking in languages that predated all known civilizations. The reflections showed not just his own image, but glimpses of those who had walked this path before. Warriors and scholars, kings and beggars, all seeking the treasure that lay at the heart of the vault. The second chamber tested agility and reflexes. Blades swung from the ceiling in complex patterns, while the floor tilted and shifted beneath his feet. Some tiles were solid, while others gave way to reveal pits filled with stakes or pools of acid. Draven moved through the deadly dance with the fluid grace of a man who had spent years dodging death. But the third chamber was different. Here, the trial was not physical, but mental. The walls showed visions, glimpses of possible futures, fragments of what might be. Draven saw Aria grown to womanhood, leading armies across distant stars. He saw her broken and enslaved, her spirit crushed by those who saw her only as a commodity. He saw himself growing old and gray, watching her children play in gardens he would never live to see. The visions were seductive and terrifying in equal measure. Many would-be treasure hunters had been found in this chamber, standing motionless before the walls, their minds lost in dreams of what could be. But Draven had learned to live with loss, to accept that the future was uncertain. He pressed forward through the maze of illusions. The fourth chamber contained guardians, not living creatures, but animated statues that moved with the fluid grace of master warriors. They were carved from some black stone that seemed to absorb light, their features hidden beneath elaborate helmets. Each guardian carried a different weapon: sword, spear, axe, and bow, and they attacked with coordinated precision. Draven fought them one by one, using the chamber's architecture to prevent them from surrounding him. The statues were incredibly strong and fast, but they lacked creativity. They followed patterns, and patterns could be learned and exploited. It took him nearly an hour to destroy all four guardians, and when it was over, he was bleeding from a dozen wounds. The final chamber contained the vault's true treasure. Not gold or jewels, but knowledge. Ancient texts covered the walls, written in a script that seemed to shift and change as he watched. At the center of the room stood a crystal pedestal, and upon it rested a single blue stone, similar to the burial crystal Aria had lost in the stream, but larger and more complex. As Draven approached, the stone began to glow with inner light. Suddenly, the chamber filled with whispers in that same ancient language. But somehow, impossibly, he understood them. The stone was a memory crystal containing the collective knowledge of the original builders. They had been blue-skinned, like Aria's people. They had built great cities among the stars before some catastrophe drove them to this world, and they had hidden their greatest secrets here, waiting for one of their descendants to claim them. Draven reached for the crystal, but hesitated. Taking it would give him the power to protect Aria, but it would also mark her as something more than just a refugee child. It would make her a target for forces far greater than Victor Harrow. The knowledge contained in the crystal was vast and dangerous. The secrets of faster-than-light travel, weapons that could crack worlds, and technologies that could reshape reality itself. It was the kind of power that had once built empires and destroyed civilizations. In the end, the choice was taken from him. The chamber began to shake, dust falling from the ancient ceiling. Somewhere above, explosions echoed through the ruins. Harrow had grown tired of waiting and had decided to take what he wanted by force. Draven grabbed the crystal and ran. Behind him, the vault of echoes began to collapse, its ancient mechanisms finally succumbing to age and trauma. He barely made it to the surface before the entire temple district caved in, sealing the secrets of the first people forever. The settlement was under attack. Harrow had hired a mercenary company to assault the community, using the chaos as cover to capture Aria. Buildings burned as armed men fought running battles through the twisting streets. The air was thick with smoke and the screams of the wounded. The mercenaries were professionals, soldiers who had learned their trade in the border wars and perfected it in a dozen conflicts. They moved with military precision, using fire and steel to drive the defenders back. But they had underestimated the settlement's resolve and knowledge of their own streets. Draven found Mara's house under siege. A group of mercenaries had surrounded the building, While inside, Mara and several other defenders held them off with crossbows and makeshift weapons. Aria was trapped on the upper floor, her silver eyes wide with terror as she watched the battle rage below. The memory crystal in Draven's hand pulsed with warm light. Suddenly, his mind was filled with knowledge he had never learned. The locations of secret passages, the weaknesses of the ancient buildings, the underground routes that connected different parts of the settlement. He knew exactly how to turn the defenders' knowledge of their home into a weapon against the invaders. Using this newfound knowledge, Draven slipped through hidden passages to reach the heart of the battle. The ancient tunnels were works of art, their walls carved with flowing script and decorated with murals that told the story of the Star People. But there was no time to admire the craftsmanship. Aria's life hung in the balance. The battle that followed was unlike anything the mercenaries had expected. The settlement's defenders seemed to anticipate their every move, striking from hidden passages and retreating through routes that didn't appear on any map. What should have been a simple raid became a nightmare of urban warfare. Draven fought his way to where Victor Harrow stood directing his men with cold precision. The slave trader was dressed in expensive armor that gleamed like silver in the firelight. His pale hands remained clean, while his hired killers did the dirty work, directing the battle like a general moving pieces on a game board. "You've caused me considerable expense," Harrow said, drawing a sword that gleamed with unnatural sharpness. The blade was inscribed with runes that seemed to writhe and shift in the firelight, and its edge glowed with a faint blue radiance. "I had hoped to take the girl without damaging her, but you've forced my hand. Dead or alive, she comes with me." Their duel was brief but vicious. Harrow was skilled, but he was used to fighting with the advantages that money could buy: better weapons, armor, and the safety of numbers. His sword was a masterwork, forged by the weaponsmiths of the Eastern Kingdoms and enchanted with protective wards. But stripped of those advantages, facing a man with nothing left to lose, he lasted less than a minute before Draven's blade found his heart. The slave trader's expensive armor might have turned aside a normal blade, but Draven's sword had been forged in the deep fires of necessity, tempered by years of survival in the Wildlands. The mercenary company broke and fled when their paymaster fell. Some tried to take hostages, but the settlement's defenders were ready for them. The ancient knowledge contained in the memory crystal had revealed every secret passage and hidden route, allowing the defenders to outmaneuver and trap their enemies. By dawn, the threat was over, but the cost had been terrible. Buildings lay in ruins, and too many good people had died defending their home. But the settlement had survived, and perhaps grown stronger in the process. In the aftermath, Mara gathered the survivors in the main square. The settlement was wounded but not broken, and there was talk of rebuilding stronger than before. But Draven knew that the peace wouldn't last. Harrow had been just the first. Others would come, drawn by the bounty on Aria's head and the rumors of ancient treasures hidden in the ruins. "The crystal," Mara said, studying the blue stone in Draven's hand. "It chose you. That means something." The memory crystal had revealed its secrets during the battle, showing Draven visions of the ancient past. The blue-skinned builders had faced a similar crisis: invasion by those who wanted to exploit their gifts. They had fought back with weapons that turned thought into reality, that bent the very fabric of space and time to their will. But those weapons had come with a price. The power had consumed them, turning their paradise into the ruined wasteland that surrounded the settlement. In the end, they had chosen to hide their knowledge rather than risk repeating their mistakes. "The knowledge is dangerous," Draven said. "It could protect Aria, but it could also destroy her." "That's a choice she'll have to make for herself," Mara replied, "when she's old enough to understand what it means." Years passed. The settlement rebuilt and grew stronger, becoming a beacon of hope for refugees from across the Wildlands. Aria grew from a frightened child into a capable young woman, learning to fight with sword and bow, to track and hunt, to read the signs of weather and beast. But she also learned the weight of legacy. The memory crystal had accepted her touch, revealing fragments of her people's history. She was not just a refugee, but the last living heir to a civilization that had spanned the stars. The knowledge was a gift and a burden, offering power beyond imagination but demanding wisdom to use it responsibly. Other challenges came and went. Bandit raids, beast attacks, political upheavals in the surrounding kingdoms. Each crisis tested the settlement's resolve, but they endured. The community had learned from their trials, becoming something stronger than the sum of its parts. Draven aged gracefully, his hair turning silver and his face gaining new lines. But his sword arm remained steady. He had found purpose again, first in protecting Aria, and then in helping to build something lasting. The empty space in his chest had filled with new bonds, not replacing what he had lost, but proving that the heart could heal even after the deepest wounds. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Aria asked the question that had haunted her for years. "Do you think Cole was right? Do you think I really brought a curse?" Draven considered his words carefully. She was 15 now, old enough to understand complex truths. "I think curse and blessing often depend on perspective," he said finally. "Cole saw your differences and chose fear. The people here see those same differences and choose acceptance. The shadow beast attacked because the settlement was weak and divided, not because of who you are." Aria nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. She leaned against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her. This remarkable young woman who had taught him that family was not just about blood, but about choice. In the distance, a shadow beast howled its lonely call. But here in the settlement, surrounded by warm lights and the laughter of children at play, it seemed like nothing more than the voice of a wild thing calling to its own kind under the stars. The data crystal pulsed gently in Aria's hands, its bioluminescent core matching the blue pigmentation of her skin. Within its crystalline matrix lay the scientific principles of a lost civilization, waiting for the day when she would be ready to understand their advanced engineering. But for now, she was content to be what she had always been, a child of two worlds, carrying the genetic heritage of star travelers in a body that had learned to survive with sword and bow. Elena Vasquez visited again the following spring, bringing news from the wider world and goods from distant markets. She smiled when she saw Aria practicing with her bow, no longer the terrified child hiding behind boulders. "I told you she was stronger than she knew," the merchant said to Draven. "We both were," he replied, watching Aria laugh as she competed with the other young people of the settlement. Blue skin and human and all the varieties in between, working and playing together without thought of difference or curse. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer frightening. They had learned that home was not a place you were born to, but something you built with your own hands and defended with your own blood. And that, Draven thought, was a lesson worth all the pain it had cost to learn. As the years continued to pass, the settlement became something unique, a place where the ancient wisdom of the crystal builders merged with the practical knowledge of frontier survival. Aria grew into her role as a keeper of that wisdom, using it not to wage war or seek conquest, but to heal the wounded land and bring life to places long barren. The last anyone heard of the shadow beasts, they had stopped hunting humans and returned to their natural prey in the deep forests. The curse that Cole Mercer had feared so much proved to be its own cure. Not destruction, but transformation. Not an ending, but a new beginning. And in the settlement of the northern reaches, under the light of twin suns and the glow of ancient memory crystals, a blue-skinned girl and her adopted father watched the dawn of a better world.